Welcome to Vendetta Sports Media. My name is James Herrick, and today I am here to do a film study on former UFC light heavyweight champion Glover Teixeira. If you have not watched a film study before, the videos are pretty simple. Basically, what we do here is I will watch some film and I will figure out some small details in a fighter's game that are a little bit harder to notice, and I will pinpoint two strengths and two weaknesses off those details that I noticed. And then at the end, I'll give a little recap with how I think a fighter can find success in the octagon and some things that their opponents can do if they want to beat them. So today we're applying that to Glover Teixeira in preparation of his UFC 283 title shot against Jamahal Hill, as they both look to grab that vacant light heavyweight belt. So, to get right into things, the first strength that we have from Glover Teixeira is how he uses folk-style wrestling and more traditional wrestling techniques in MMA. So right now in MMA, there's a big move away from wrestling in the center of the mat, and we see a lot of guys look to get takedowns up against the fence. We see a lot of guys look to get their back to the fence as they defend takedowns. Now, Glover Teixeira can do that. I'm not saying he can't do that. But I think what separates him as a wrestler is some of his ability to go out there and get a takedown in the open mat and just wrestle freely off the cage. I think he's better than most guys at that, and it's a great way for him to supplement his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with some really strong wrestling. So to highlight that, we're going to look at some takedowns he had against Yuri Prochazka and Thiago Santos. Glover does a really good job here of setting up this takedown with his hands, and he gets in really deep on this single leg to where he's got Prochazka's leg in between his own two legs. But in order to finish this, he needs to get that to the outside, and he's able to do that. And once he gets it to the outside, the key point is grabbing that ankle of Prochazka. Once he grabs that ankle, that gives him two benefits. One, it makes it harder for Prochazka to escape, but at the same time, he can also elevate that ankle, which gets him off balance, and he can trip Prochazka and land this takedown. This takedown here is pretty simple, and in this position, Glover already has his hands locked around the waist of Santos, so instead of trying to get this takedown up against the fence, he just pulls him off that fence, and it puts him in a perfect position just to lift and drop Santos. It's not much more work than your traditional wrestling mat return. All right, so this is a sit through. And what Glover's going to do here is he's going to kind of post up with that left leg. And from there, what he's doing is he's sitting out towards that leg. And then he's going to throw that elbow up in the air and kind of pop his head out of that armpit of Prochazka. And this is going to create enough pressure to where Prochazka snaps down to the mat. And then from there, Teixeira's just got to switch around and take his easy reversal. As you can probably already tell, Glover Teixeira is a very good grappler. So this second strength that we have for Glover is also in that grappling department. And what we have this time is I like the way that he mixes his ground and pound and his submissions when he gets to the ground, right? He uses a balance of the two, doesn't really rely on one higher than the other, and it helps him create opportunities on the ground to do damage and find submissions. So first, we're going to look at a clip from his fight with Yuri Prochazka to kind of illustrate the point that I'm bringing up here. All right, so we're not getting too technical yet, but what I want you to observe is the tendencies. So notice how Teixeira started off throwing ground and pound, and now he's in an arm triangle. And this is kind of the trend that he will keep, right? He will go ground and pound, back to submissions. Now he's going ground and pound again. There he goes, back into the submission. So he kind of just balances these couple skills. Now that you have an idea by what I mean when I say he mixes his submissions with his ground and pound, we're now going to look at his fight with Thiago Santos to kind of further illustrate what is possible when you're able to really find a balance, land ground and pound, and eventually land submissions. Okay, so we have Teixeira in half guard, and he's sitting here in half guard, and to pass, he starts throwing ground and pound shots. Now, what this does is it forces Santos to move, And when he moves, it gives Teixeira the opportunity to pass guard. First, he goes from half to side, and then he's able to step over from side to full mount. Once he gets to full mount, you see more ground and pound shots. Santos rolls to his stomach, gives up the rear naked choke, but he does get saved by the bell. Now that we've highlighted a couple of strengths, we're going to switch over to the weaknesses. And the first weakness that really stuck out to me was how much he struggles at defending straight shots like jabs and straights. And he sometimes, right, he can slip a jab well and counter well, but I think more often than not, he's getting hit by these straight shots, and they're leading to big issues in his striking defense, right? Striking defense as a whole is probably his weakest area in his game. And I think the biggest issue with that, like I said, is his inability to avoid those straight shots coming up the middle. So once again, we're going to look at some film with his fight with Yuri, where we can just see him kind of getting hit by jabs and straights and things of that nature. Starting things off simple, here we see Prochazka just step in and land a solid jab. In this one, we see Yuri throw a 1-2 that makes Glover retreat, and then Yuri just follows up again with a really nice jab that lands hard. In this one, these two are moving, and we just see Yuri stick out two really strong straights that both land. In this one, we see Yuri step in with that straight 2 more times, and he lands some more. I think the reason that Teixeira really struggles against these types of strikes is because he's not the most athletic. He's very strong, he's very tough, right? He has a fighter's build, but he doesn't have elite movement, elite head movement. He's just not very quick, doesn't have super high reaction time, and he doesn't necessarily have to have those things, especially when your best skill is your grappling. But I think that's where we're seeing this issue come from. And in all honesty, I wouldn't be as concerned about this. But the issue that I see is that he'll get hit with a 1, and then a fighter can follow up with a big right hand behind it. Or he'll get hit with a 1-2, and then a fighter will start unloading a massive combination. So I think where this really blossoms into a massive problem is when fighters are real active with showing him a jab and then capitalizing with longer counters. And this was something that Anthony Smith did a lot in their fight. This is a good example of Anthony Smith staying active and just pumping out that jab several times. And once he throws that jab, he gets Glover moving and just pokes him with that 2 right behind it. In this one, Smith commits with a jab, but that 2 right behind it is the one that lands. One thing that Prochazka would do is that he would throw a 1-2, but after he threw that 1-2 and landed, he would follow up with hooks as Glover's guard was starting to drop. Now, this second weakness that I have for Teixeira's game may feel a little bit nitpicky, but I do think it serves a point, okay? What I have here is that he can overreact to feints a little bit. Now, there aren't really a ton of examples where he'll overreact to a feint and get punished for it, but you can see points in time where he's really overreacting, and you can see those things very clearly. And I think this is kind of another problem with his striking defense, not as big as the jab and straight shot struggles like we just showed, but I do think it is a smaller issue in his striking defense. In this clip, Smith feints a kick and a jab, and he gets a small reaction from Teixeira on both of those. In this one here, Prochazka steps forward like he's going to throw that left hand that we showed earlier. This time it's a feint, and he gets the reaction. Now we're going to start putting things together. In this one here, we see Smith pump out the jab, and Teixeira's hands come up, and then next strike, he throws that jab, the hands come up, the head moves, and the 2 behind it really cracks Teixeira. So the read he got on that feint helped him land that 2 just a couple seconds later. All right, so now looking at things that Glover Teixeira needs to do to win fights, we're going to start with his striking and then move over to his grappling. So in the striking, offensively, I like the way that he changes levels and mixes shots to the head and body. He'll throw a lot of combinations that are body, head, body, or body, body, head, or head, body, body, right? Very rarely, I shouldn't say very rarely, but most of the time he is mixing in those shots. It's not as common that he's really solely headhunting. He's very often switching up levels, which I think is beneficial when you're looking to wear on an opponent, and I think landing those body shots is beneficial. So I think that is something that he should continue to do, and it's something that works out well for him a lot of times. Another thing that I think he does really well is he will pick his times to be offensive with his hands. Um, he'll do a good job of realizing, okay, I've got this guy in a position up against the fence, or I've kind of got him corralled. He's kind of on the post of the octagon, and I think this is a good opportunity to strike. And then he will throw a lot of hooks, right? And he'll mix the head and body, and he'll kind of keep these guys corralled in this little corner of the octagon and come out with a lot of shots. And he picks up the volume a lot more in those scenarios. So I think that is a good example of where Glover may not be able to go be a super technical boxer, but he does pick his times to unload with the volume and be super offensive with his hands. And I think that is a good moment for him to do that, is when he has guys up against the fence corralled because they don't really have a great exit, so he can really unload because he does have powerful hands. So that's a good time for him to let his hands fly and try and land some powerful strikes. And if he ever needs to, if he ever gets in trouble in that type of scenario, he can always level change and go for that takedown up against the fence. That's always a good card to have in your back pocket when you're striking like that offensively. Now, when we're looking at the grappling, I wish that Glover would grapple more, right? I think he is one of the better grapplers in this light heavyweight division. His ability to mix wrestling and BJJ is really, really unique, right? We don't see very many grapplers out there who are great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners, and then they go out and they learn high-level wrestling skills. And I think that is one of the best ways to become a great mixed martial arts grappler. We see a lot of guys rely too much on one of the two styles. They say, I'm either a wrestler and I do this, or I'm a BJJ practitioner and I do this. But truly, the guys that are able to pick and pull the best of both worlds are the guys who ultimately find the most success. And I think that is something that Glover Teixeira has done well, right? We showed video clips of him with some really great wrestling moments, and we showed some clips with him working in ground and pound and landing submissions and passing guard and doing some great things with his jiu-jitsu. So I wish he would focus more on taking guys down, because the skill gap is much higher in comparison to his grappling and his opponent's grappling. In just about every single fight, he's going to have a big skill gap in that area. And at a minimum, even if he's a better striker than a guy, the skill gap in his striking and in his opponent's striking is not going to be as high, and it will leave him in more moments where he can get caught with a big shot and knocked out, because that is, how he's lost in the past. For example, your Gustafsson fight or your Anthony Johnson fight, where those guys were able to put him out on the feet. So I think those are some things that I would look for in terms of grappling. Just work to get the fight to the ground, because he is the better grappler, but I don't think he feels the need to work on the ground. I think it is a little bit, I don't want to say ignorant, but you're not working to your strengths if you're Glover and you're going out there and striking. So I think he needs to attempt a lot of takedowns and spend as much time on top as he can, because he is great from that position on top. Now, beating Glover Teixeira is not an easy task at all, because he is such a great grappler, and he is an above average striker as well, with very powerful hands, right? So that makes him a very tough case to crack. And I think the first thing that you need to do is be prepared for that high single. The high single is a takedown that he will go to often, and it's something where you don't see it as often. So a lot of guys probably aren't as prepared for it if they're not specifically training for Glover. So I would say make sure your single leg takedown, high singles, make sure your wrestling takedowns for that specific takedown are on point, or else you're going to get taken down a lot. And once you get taken down, I don't think anybody is ever going to go perfect defending Glover Teixeira takedowns, because he is so good when he commits to landing a takedown. But if you are taken down, I don't think it's a good idea to, lay there and wait things out. I think we see a lot of guys, and not just Glover's opponents, but a lot of guys in the sport in total, they'll play with their closed guard and they'll try and land submissions off their back, and they won't be getting back to their feet where they won't be trying to reverse position and get on top. And they're content with laying on bottom and chasing submissions and waiting for the round to end, or waiting for their opponent to make a mistake to where they can explode and escape. The issue with that when you're fighting Glover is Glover rarely makes mistakes on the ground, right? So sitting there waiting for him to make a mistake is not going to work. And if you are just sitting there playing submissions off your back, you're not going to land a submission on him. And what's going to end up happening is he's going to really start boxing you up with his ground and pound, right? He'll mix body, he'll mix head, he'll start rubbing his forehead into your chin, right? It's really just a position where you don't want to be, where it's not a fun spot to be. If you start getting beat up on the ground by Glover Teixeira, and then he starts mixing in his submissions, and ultimately you are either going to get tired or you're going to get finished if you are just willing to be on bottom against Glover Teixeira. And then on the feet, I think the best course of action is really attack those straight shots. I mean, we showed it for a reason, and we showed that he struggles in that department. So I think showing that jab a lot, being aware that he is not, incapable of doing it. So you need to be aware that he can counter. But I think a good opportunity to land a lot of offensive strikes is throw out that jab, see where that head's going. Which way is he looking to avoid that jab if you're not landing it, and then start following up with some big combinations off your jab. I think those are some really good things to do in the striking realm, and may be able to lead to some damage. Now, with that being said, it's not an easy thing to do. I do think you need to have great cardio, because if you're defending takedowns, getting up off bottom and being active with jabs and pumping out shots on the feet, that takes a lot of effort, right? So you need to have your cardio on point. Otherwise, you're going to get tired doing those things, and then you won't be able to defend the takedown anymore, and you'll get taken down and finished. So those are kind of my thoughts on what you need to do to beat Glover Teixeira. Thank you for watching this film study on Glover Teixeira. If you enjoyed, make sure to go and check out some of the previous film studies that we have done on the channel. Those are up. So if you like this, they're the same video, just for a different fighter. Maybe you find a fighter you like more. So make sure to go check that out. And in addition, go check out our website, vendettasportsmedia.com. If you're a UFC fan, I imagine if you watch this video and made it to the end, you're a UFC fan. We're pumping out content for UFC 283 this weekend, and we're just generally covering UFC a lot. But if you're not a UFC fan, the site has just about every sport you can imagine. So make sure you go and check out vendettasportsmedia.com. But ultimately, thank you so much for watching this. I appreciate it.